At first, Uwaike appeared like any other child. He grew quickly, perhaps too quickly, and by the time he was 3, he was unusually intelligent for his age. But with his brilliance came something sinister. One afternoon, Ifeoma was cooking in the kitchen when she heard a loud crash outside. She rushed out to find her neighbor's son, Chijioke, lying unconsciously by the roadside. A crowd gathered, murmuring in fear. "I saw it," an elderly woman cried out. That boy Uwaike was playing with Chijioke, and suddenly Chijioke fell as if something invisible struck him. "Where is Uwaike?" Ifeoma asked frantically, but her son was nowhere to be seen. Moments later, he emerged from behind a tree, smiling innocently. "Did you hurt Chijioke?" she asked, kneeling to his level. "No, Mama, we were just playing and he fell," Uwaike said, his tone too calm for a child. Chijioke was rushed to the hospital, where he later died from internal injuries. That night, Ifeoma couldn't sleep. Something about her son didn't feel right, but she clung to hope, convincing herself it was all a coincidence. Izuna adored Uwaike, despite the strange incidents that surrounded him. But one evening, when Uwaike was 5 years old, Izuna scolded him for breaking a vase. "Uwaike, how many times have I told you not to touch things that don't belong to you?" Izuna said sternly. Uwaike's expression darkened. He stared at his father without blinking, his tiny fists clenched. "I didn't do it," he muttered. "Don't lie to me," Izuna snapped. Suddenly, Uwaike's eyes glittered with an unnatural light. Izuna staggered back, clutching his chest. "Papa!" Ifeoma screamed as she rushed to his side, but it was too late. Izuna collapsed to the ground, lifeless. The doctors later confirmed a heart attack, but Ifeoma knew there was more to it. That night she sat alone in the dark, tears streaming down her face. "God, what is happening?" she whispered, but deep inside she feared the answer. Despite everything, Ifeoma couldn't bring herself to believe her son was evil. Uwaike had a way of making her doubt her instincts. He was affectionate, always clinging to her, and whenever she confronted him about strange occurrences, he would cry, convincing her it wasn't his fault. One Sunday morning, as they prepared for church, Uwaike tugged at her dress. "Mama, why do you always think bad things about me?" he asked, his eyes wide with innocence. "I don't, I just want to understand," Ifeoma replied. "I'm a good boy, Mama. I love you," he said, wrapping his tiny arms around her. Her heart softened. How could a child who spoke with such tenderness be evil? Yet, the nagging feeling remained. She decided to visit Pastor Dan after service. One fateful day, Ifeoma decided to take Uwaike along as she went to the local market. The market was bustling with activity, traders haggling, children running around, and customers moving from one store to store. Uwaike held his mother's hand tightly, scanning the crowd with a cold, calculating gaze. When Ifeoma negotiated the price of some yams, Uwaike slipped his hand free and wandered off. He stopped at the edge of the market, where a small group of children played beside a stack of crates loaded with palm oil bottles. Without a word, he bent down, picked up a small stone, and threw it towards the crate with unnatural precision. The stone struck a wooden plank supporting the crate, causing them to collapse. In seconds, chaos erupted. The heavy crate stumbled, shattering the bottles of oil. The slippery liquid spilled across the crowded path, and several people lost their footing. A vendor pushing a wheelbarrow loaded with goods slipped, crashing into a fruit store. The ensuing panic caused more people to fall, and in the end, 3 people were severely injured, with one young girl dying from a head injury. By the time Ifeoma found Uwaike, he was standing at the edge of the chaos, a faint smile playing on his lips. "What happened here?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know, Mama," he said, his tone devoid of emotion. "It just happened." Though shaken, Ifeoma convinced herself that it was merely an accident. But deep down, She knew Uwaike was somehow involved. She couldn't deny the unsettling feeling that grew stronger with each passing day. When Uwaike turned 10, Ifeoma enrolled him in a private school, hoping it would provide a sense of normalcy. He excelled academically, but strange events soon followed him. One morning during assembly, the school principal scolded a group of students for being late. Uwaike, standing among his classmates, watched the scene with an unblinking stare. As the principal walked away, Uwaike muttered something under his breath. Moments later, a loud scream rang out. The principal had collapsed at the entrance of his office. Teachers rushed to his aid, but he was pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital. The cause? A sudden cardiac arrest. No one could explain how a seemingly healthy man had died so suddenly. Later that day, Uwaike casually told his mother, "The principal shouldn't have shouted at those children. Maybe that's why he fell." If that comment wasn't airing enough, the same pattern continued. Teachers and students who crossed paths with Uwaike often reported strange illnesses or mishaps. Though nothing could be directly linked to him, Ifeoma began to notice that wherever Uwaike went, disaster followed. During a visit to the village for a family gathering, another tragedy struck. It was evening and the family had gathered around a fire, telling stories and enjoying roasted yams. Uwaike, sitting quietly by his mother's side, appeared unusually calm. Suddenly, without warning, the fire flamed up violently, sending sparks flying in every direction. In moments, the dry thatched roofs of the family outdoor kitchen caught fire. Before anyone could react, the flames spread rapidly, engulfing nearby huts. Panic ensued as villagers scrambled to put out the fire. "Mama, it's beautiful, isn't it?" Uwaike said, staring at the flames with a chilling fascination. "Beautiful?" "Uwaike, people's homes are burning," Ifeoma yelled, dragging him away. Though no lives were lost, several families were left homeless. The elders gathered that night, murmuring about the strange events. Some whispered about Uwaike, claiming he was cursed or possessed. Ifeoma's heart pounded with fear as she overheard them. She knew something was terribly wrong with her child, but what could she do? Unable to bear the mounting fear and guilt, Ifeoma decided to visit Pastor Dan. She poured out her heart, tears streaming down her face, as she recounted Uwaike's strange behavior and the numerous tragedies. "Pastor, I don't know what to do. He's my son, but it feels like he's not a normal child," she sobbed. Pastor Dan listened intently, his expression growing graver by the minute. After a moment of silence, he spoke. "Sister Ifeoma, this is not an ordinary situation. The enemy has planted something in your life, but with God, nothing is impossible. We will fast and pray, and by His grace, this child will be delivered." They agreed to hold a 7-day prayer session involving trusted church members. Pastor Dan instructed Ifeoma to bring Uwaike to the church every evening for prayers. Though fearful of what might happen, Ifeoma clung to the hope that God would intervene. On the first evening of the 7-day prayer session, Ifeoma walked into the church with Uwaike by her side. The child's demeanor was calm, too calm, and it unsettled those present. Pastor Dan and a small group of intercessors began to pray, but as soon as they did, Uwaike let out a cry, piercing cry that echoed through the church. "Mama, I don't want to be here," he shouted, clutching Ifeoma's arms tightly. His voice was unnaturally deep for a child, and his eyes glowed with a strange light. "Leave him be," Pastor Dan commanded, his voice firm. "This child belongs to God, not to the kingdom of darkness." Uwaike began to thrash wildly, his poor frame surprisingly strong as he resisted the prayer. The intercessors intensified their prayers, calling upon the power of God to break whatever hold the enemy had on him. Suddenly, Uwaike collapsed on the floor, motionless. A thick silence filled the room as everyone watched, unsure of what had happened. Moments later, he opened his eyes, but there was no longer glowing. He sat up quickly and looked around confused. "Mama, He said in a small voice, "What's happening?" "You are free, my son," Ifeoma whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You are free." The next day, Uwaike sat before the congregation, ready to share his story. Though only a child, his voice carried the weight that silenced the entire church. "I didn't know what I was when I was born," he began, "but I remember a dark place, where the water spirit spoke to me. She said I was sent to cause pain and destruction. She told me I had to make people suffer." Gasps filled the room, but Pastor Dan raised a hand to calm everyone. "Let him speak," he urged. "She gave me powers," Walke continued, "and I could see things, people's fears, their weaknesses. I didn't want to hurt anyone, but it was like something inside me made me do it. When I saw Papa angry that day, I didn't mean for him to die. It just happened." Ifeoma covered her mouth, sobbing quietly. The pain of losing her husband resurfaced, but she also felt a strange relief hearing her son speak openly about what had tormented their family for years. "The spirit made me cause the market accident and the fire in the village," Uwaike said, his voice trembling. "She wanted me to bring chaos everywhere I went. But, but something changed when Mama brought me here. When Pastor Dan prayed, I felt something leave me, a darkness I didn't even know I carried. Now, I just want to be free." After Uwaike's confession, Pastor Dan led another round of prayers, this time for complete restoration. The church prayed fervently, asking God to restore every loss Ifeoma had suffered. Over the next few weeks, a remarkable transformation took place. Uwaike became a normal child, playful, curious, and full of life. He no longer displayed the strange behavior that had once frightened everyone. The news of his deliverance spread throughout the village and town, and people who had once shunned Ifeoma began to respect her courage. One Sunday morning, Pastor Dan called Ifeoma and Uwaike to the altar. "This testimony is a reminder that no situation is beyond God's power," he said, addressing the congregation. "Even when it seems like the enemy had the upper hand, God can turn things around if we trust Him wholeheartedly." The congregation erupted in praise, their voice lifted in gratitude for the miracle they had witnessed. As life returned to normal, Ifeoma often reflected on everything that had happened. She realized that her desperation for a child had led her down a dangerous path, but God's mercy had prevailed. She learned to trust God's timing and to believe in His promises, no matter how long they took to manifest. Uwaike, now free from the darkness that once controlled him, grew up to be a bright and compassionate young man. He often shared his story with others, teaching them about the unseen battles of life and the importance of faith. One evening, as Ifeoma and Uwaike were discussing, he looked up at her and said, "Mama, do you think God let this happen so we could help other people?" She smiled, her heart swelling with love and pride. "Maybe, my son. Sometimes God allows us to go through difficult things so we can help others find their way." Years later, Ifeoma became a counselor in her church, helping other women who struggled with infertility. Her testimony inspired many to hold onto their faith, no matter how hopeless their situation seemed. And so, the story of Uwaike, a boy born twice, once by human hands and once by God's grace, became a powerful reminder of the mysteries of life and the unwavering power of God. This is quite an interesting story, and I would love to hear your reaction in the comment section. Please don't forget to subscribe to this channel and press on the notification bell to get notified when I drop the next video. See you in the next one. Bye.